everybody, and welcome to Summer Thursday. It's great to have you here. I got a couple things to tell you about. If you were watching in the last, week and then this week as well, you probably heard the story about Brendan Deppa. Please just don't freak out, okay? Because social media is like 50% hating on him and 50% feeling like the guy got a really bad deal. Brendan Deppa was 17 years old in high school when he unleashed holy hell on his teacher's aide. This was the video. It was caught on surveillance. Look at this. It's just awful. It is just awful watching this. He is massive, and she is tiny, and she is unconscious, and he is beating her to the point where it took multiple adults to pull him off her. Here's the backstory, because you do need one. He has extremely special needs. He has a list of disorders this long that school knew about. He had an individual education program, right, that they weren't following necessarily at this school. Somebody took his Nintendo Switch out of his hands, and that was a massive trigger for this explosion that he had. But if you know special needs, you know that can happen, which is why you have an IEP, which is why there's a teacher's aide, which is why there are protocols to deal with kids like this who have diagnosed medical issues. You just saw a picture of him with his mom. His mom is devastated over all of it, over the attack of Joan Niditch, that poor teacher's aide who was beaten within an inch of her life. She's also devastated that her son got 5 years in prison. Because in her words, when she spoke with me last on this program, she said, it's like a death sentence to put a special needs child like mine in a prison system. She's back here tonight because he has now been sentenced and he's off to grown-up jail for the next 3 years. He's already served 2. Going to talk about everything. Now that he's an actual adult, not 17 anymore, he's turning 19, how can she even monitor his meds? That's all coming. And then do you remember the story about that Detroit neurosurgeon who lived in that spectacular mansion? This is him in better days, very wealthy, lots of friends. Everybody loved him. And then he was found dead in his attic. He'd been dragged up there face first, wearing nothing but a sock, rolled in a bloody carpet. Somebody didn't want him to be found dead. And it's been over a year. Police told us they were going to find that killer, and we've been waiting month after month after month. And now they got a guy. The thing is, they had a guy, the same guy, right after the murder. So what took them to hell and gone? France and England and a whole bunch of states before they could bring that guy back in over a year later. We're going to look into that story tonight as well. And then I guess you got to be a pretty bad hombre to be called El Diablo. I don't speak a lot of Spanish, but I know that's the devil. Turns out a guy with a street name, the Devil, has been on the run for 20 years. They've been looking for him, hell and gone looking for this guy. The accusation is he shot a man in the face outside a bar, killed him, and then took off. But they found him. You won't believe how. It's like kind of crazy. They found him and they brought him in. And that's an interesting story in itself. But wait a minute. Maybe the biggest part of this story is what that guy has been doing while on the run for the last 2 decades. How's he been making a living? That you have to stick around for. First, I want to start here, though. If you were watching earlier this week, we brought you the story of a Florida teenager who beat up a teacher's aide within an inch of her life, all because that Nintendo Switch of his had been taken away from him. A judge sent him to prison. Judging by all the feedback that everybody seems to be throwing out there online, a lot of you think that that's exactly where he belongs. We also brought you the story of a young man who suffers from a number of serious diagnosed behavioral disorders, including, but not limited to, autism, PTSD, anxiety, depression, irrational fears, and at least 4 other recognized disorders. This teenager was sent to a regular school, normal school, despite the fact that his mom was real worried about that and didn't want it to happen. But the authorities said it had to, and they tailored an individual education plan for him to manage his disorders. And that plan allegedly went right out the window. The attacker of the paraprofessional teacher. This guy, caught on video. All of this, impossible to deny, right? And that mentally challenged teenager whose daily life is a minute-by-minute struggle, they are one and the same kid, and his name is Brendan Deppa. And after Brendan pleaded no contest in adult court to aggravated battery, a judge sentenced him this week to 5 years in prison, followed by 15 years of probation. He could have been put away for a hell of a lot longer, 30 years, in fact. And that's exactly what the victim in this case, Joan Niditch, was pushing for. Here's what she told me on this program last year.
Jail is the place for him. He did a violent crime, and he has to pay for that. And I'm going to ask the judge for no leniency, no mercy. I don't get any. I wake up every single morning, whether it's a headache or my shoulder hurts or my ribs hurt or something hurts, and I have to be reminded of this, and this is going to be for the rest of my life.
All of that notwithstanding, a lot of people think that prison is the last place that Brendan Deppa belongs. And at the top of that list is that woman right there on your screen, Brendan Deppa's mom. And I'm pleased to welcome back Leanne Deppa to this program. Leanne, thank you very much for being back on the program with me. First and foremost, as a mom myself, I can't imagine what it is you're coping with, going through, the thoughts you have every night, and the nights that you are unable to sleep. I did want to ask you what your reaction was when you heard the sentence.
First of all, Ashleigh, I want to thank you for having me on tonight. I really appreciate that. It obviously was not what we were hoping for. And we're devastated and just trying to figure out the next steps.
So what did you think was going to happen? Like, were you prepared for 30 years? Did you think it was going to be more than it was, less than it was?
I didn't think it would be 30 years. I was hoping it was going to be less. That I had found some residential hospitals that were willing to take him, and that they had written letters saying they would accept him. And I had a group home that was willing to accept him. I also felt like that I'm able to manage him now, and through our, how we've been together over the last few years. And I had studied up on courses that, as an occupational therapist, I'm allowed to take courses that psychologists and social workers all take. And so I had been brushing up even more on courses involving autism and emotional regulation and things like that.
So, Leanne, Brendan's going to turn 19, I think, in a few weeks, like towards the end of this month, if I remember correctly. He is an adult, which means, as all of us parents understand, when our 17-year-olds turn 18, we don't have the rights anymore of overseeing their medical and making sure that they get help and care that they need. And he's in an adult prison. What is happening with him? Are you able to know about his treatment protocol in prison? Do you know if he's getting medication, therapies, the things that not only he needs, right, but also the other inmates need? Because if he's set off or if he's triggered, God help the other inmates who might not know what could happen.
Right. Medication management is huge, and figuring out, how to make that happen. I know that he can sign a release that gives me access to his medical records, and I will be all over that. That when he was in the Jacksonville Pretrial Detention Center, it took an act of an attorney writing them to get him on any meds. They had stopped all his meds cold turkey on him.
What happened when his medication regimen ended?
He was having massive hallucinations. He was going through horrible withdrawals to where he wasn't sleeping. It was really bad. I have been talking to other families that are dealing with stuff like this and getting advice from them. I'm scared though. There is a lawsuit right now against the Florida Department of Corrections over a man who has schizophrenia, and they didn't give him his medications for 6 days, and they handed him a chainsaw. and he killed himself. I talk to his mother, frequently. So I am rightfully worried about when he goes, whether or not he'll get the treatment that he needs.
Tell me about your interactions with Brendan. Like, are you close to the jail where he's been housed? Will you be close to the prison? Does he understand what's going on? What are your conversations like?
So I've been now that we've had the sentencing, I talk to him frequently, and I've been trying to warn him, not to trust anybody, to not borrow anything, to not take anything that anybody offers him. So just trying to talk to other families and prepare him as best as I can.
Does he get it? Like, does he know the circumstance he's in and what lies ahead when he's transferred to a full state prison?
I don't think he gets it. But, when I've talked to him and I've been tearful and crying, he says, "It's okay, Mom, I'm going to be okay." I really don't think he understands what he's going into and facing. I've told him all the horrible things that I've heard about, and he's like, "I'll be okay, Mom."
Look, typical teenagers don't understand what would lie ahead in a circumstance like that, let alone a special needs teenager like Brendan. Lest I be insensitive to Joan Niditch, and I know that you and I have spoken about her before, and that you are, extremely concerned about her well-being and her recovery. The blowback online is amazing. 50% of the folks out there are so worried about your son. 50% of the folks out there think he should be incarcerated forever. And I suppose we do need to ask about the safety of others, because he will be released, right? 3 years at least, and he will be released. What happens then?
Well, right now, the judge has sentenced him to a group home upon being released. And then we would have to apply to allow him to come home with us after that. So the group home is almost like community confinement, because in an intensive behavioral group home, they don't go anywhere without staff.
He is a big boy, right? I can't remember how tall he is, what he weighs, but he's a big, big boy. And you just mentioned at the beginning of this interview, Leanne, that you could manage him at home. How? I just wonder, with children who have the kinds of diagnoses that Brendan has, how can you manage someone who's so big and can be triggered?
Well, first of all, I have a lot more skills now than I did when I sent him to the Autism Behavioral Hospital. We were going through some major family crisis at that time. I co-regulate with him. Whenever he is when he's upset, he calls me. And by the time he gets off of the phone, he's calmed down. I know how to talk to him now and not let things escalate. He's come a long way.
Leanne, I'm thinking about you, Yeah, you say, it's amazing when you say that you can co-regulate, you can help them. It is an incredible skill. You're an amazing woman if you can do all that, because there's so many moms out there, dads out there who struggle mightily. They read everything they can and still struggle with trying to manage kids who have these kinds of diagnoses. My heart breaks for you. I'm so sorry that you're going through this, and I wish you the best. Please keep in touch with us, Leanne.
Thank you. I will.
And we will continue to follow Leanne's journey as Brendan is incarcerated and serves his sentence. In the meantime, I want to bring in Gene Lopes. He is a retired special education teacher. He has been tutoring Brendan in jail for months. Gene, I'm sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. It's Lopes, correct? I think I said it wrong the first time.
No problem.
I think it probably happens a lot. As Ashleigh has misspelled my entire life, I am sensitive to that. Let me ask you, if I can, Gene, about your interactions with Brendan as you've been working with him behind bars. Tell me everything. What's he been like? What's the relationship like?
And first of all, I want to just let you know that Leanne Deppa is the bravest, most courageous person that I have ever met in my life. And she continues to fight for Brendan, and I'm with her with that fight. As far as, Brendan in jail, we were very fortunate that the chief at the jail, Chief Daniel Engert, has been very generous about allowing me into the jail, into a classroom that I got to work with him. I got to know him. I think, we kind of figured out it's probably been somewhere around 100 different days, probably been a couple hundred hours. And when we started, Brendan was guarded. He wasn't real enthusiastic. He wanted to do this, but he wasn't real enthusiastic about getting started. And as we progressed and as I've gotten to know him, and even up till last Thursday, I was with him in a jail, and he was asking me to give him more work on percentages because he's having trouble understanding percentages. So we did get one part of the GED finished, which he passed, his reading and writing part, and he's got a ways to go. He still has a ways to go as far as the educational part, but I kind of looked at my role as a therapeutic tutor where we spent time together, and it wasn't always about, ABCs and history and social studies. Yeah. It was about getting to know each other.
I should mention, when you say percentages, you mean math. I mean, she is just learning, the rest of his high school curriculum, the percentages that come along with math. I do want to ask you about the big elephant in the room, and that is the incident, the attack. Do you ever speak with him about the attack, and do you know if he's sorry?
He is very sorry, and we have spoken often about it. And Brendan has learned a lot. Through our time together, initially he was he did blame Joan. He also was angry at the judge. He was angry at everything, and over time he has come to realize that this was something he did. This was something he did wrong. And the sad part is that the judge in making this ruling said that Brendan hasn't shown any remorse, and he hasn't shown any sympathy towards or empathy towards Ms. Snadich, when Brendan wrote an apology letter that he did not get to read. And the reason he didn't get to read it was that if he read the letter, the prosecutor was going to be able to cross-examine him. And at that point, the way the prosecutor, and I know it's her job, but the way the prosecutor had approached this was all bad. Brendan was bad. Brendan was a bad human being. Brendan was dangerous. He was, I think rightly his attorney felt that he couldn't put Brendan through that.
I understand that. Can I ask you, and I'm not going to ask you to do this now live on television, but can you discuss it with Brendan and with his mom as well? And maybe we can read that letter on the air on this program. Now that the adjudication is finished, there's no risk. But it would be really great to be able to hear how he feels, and maybe for Ms. Snadich to hear it as well. Can we talk about this after the program and maybe schedule something a little later?
Yes, certainly. And I did have a talk with Brendan about doing that somewhere in the future because he did want. If you look at the video, you will see when the judge starts to pronounce that he wasn't feeling any sorrow, you can see Brendan turn to his attorney and grab a piece of paper and say, I want to. That was the paper he wanted to read.
Well, you know what? Let's plan for this, Mr. Lopes. Let's plan for this. I'm going to get with the producers after the program and reconnect with you, and obviously with his mom as well, and let's continue to follow up. Thank you for this. I really appreciate what you're doing, and I also appreciate you talking to us about it.
And thank you so much for doing this. We all really appreciate it, and I will tell you that Brendan has been worth this, and he's an incredible person, and he has a lot to contribute. So thank you again.
Gene Lopes is Brendan Deppa's tutor, and he will be back with us again. Thank you again. I do want to let our audience know that we put out an invitation to Joan Niditch to come back on the program. We interviewed her originally. It was a great interview. She was very clear about her thoughts and her feelings, but she hasn't had a chance to get back to us, or perhaps isn't. We're working on it. We're still working on it. We'd like to have her back now since the sentencing. Okay, that's a lot. Still to come, 2 people take a cross-country road trip. Only one of them comes home. Gabby Petito was not the first to be murdered on the trip of a lifetime, and I am sorry to say she will not be the last. After a break, a Pennsylvania woman heads west with her boyfriend and suffocates in the desert. As deaths go, it must have been absolute hell. As murders go, it was strictly amateur hour. And that story's next. If your significant other suggests that you pack a few bags and hit the open road, I sure hope you think, how spontaneous, how romantic. I hope you don't think it's a murder plot. That said, if you follow true crime like we do, I can see where you might assume the worst. In September of 2019, 2 full years before the murder of Gabby Petito, a Pennsylvania woman named Jamie Feeden set out for Las Vegas with her on-again, off-again boyfriend, John Matthew Chapman. Before I dig into the details of that trip, it is important to note that Jamie had a medical condition that affected her eyes. It affected the way she spoke. It kept her at just over 4 feet tall and 75 pounds. That boyfriend, Chapman, told her they would go house hunting and maybe even get married in Nevada. But instead, he drove her deep into the desert for what he later told police was a bondage photo shoot. He zip-tied her to a signpost. He put duct tape over her nose and then put it over her mouth. And then he sat back and he watched as Jamie suffocated right there in front of him, slowly and horrifically, incomprehensibly, in the blazing hot sun. And when Jamie was finally dead, he then set about to strip her naked and leave her body there in the elements of the desert. The photo shoot part, that was true. John Matthew Chapman took pictures of Jamie Feeden's naked, lifeless body with his phone. And that's exactly where police would later find those pictures in the deleted file. Chapman, after that heinous crime, drove all the way back to Pennsylvania alone, where he then took up residence in Jamie's home, spending the money that Jamie drew from a family trust. And then he just went ahead and found himself a new girlfriend. Jamie's death went unnoticed for 2 months until November, when a friend asked police to do a welfare check. And the next day, Chapman confessed. And this year, he was convicted in federal court of kidnapping resulting in death, and he was sentenced to life in prison. His admitted motive was money, but that hardly explains the torture that he put Jamie through in the desert. And so to try to make any sense of it, I turned to Michael Arntfield. He's a detective turned criminologist, a professor at the University of Western Ontario in Canada. And he's the author of several books, including Murder City. Michael, thanks for being on. I was really having a tough time reading the details of this story today. And I cover a lot. I mean, I've covered a lot. But just putting myself in Jamie's position, you know, she's trusting that her boyfriend is taking her on a trip of a lifetime. And then she's suffering until she dies right in front of him as he watches. I can't get my head around it. But I suppose if this is your business, you can?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on and for properly reporting on this case, which few others are doing. This is absolutely horrific and harkens back, quite frankly. There's so many similarities to a lesser known case that your most avid true crime sort of devotees might know, Harvey Glattman, 1957 and 1958. He murdered at least 3 women in Los Angeles by luring them for photo shoots and turned to bondage, photographed them in various states of undress and in various restraints, and then strangled them and disposed of them in the desert. So we have this spectrum of behavior with people who have a predilection known as sadism. So most of these predilections known as paraphilias end in philia, and you can probably think of a few that are weird and dangerous. But sadism is arguably at the top because this describes somebody who is excited, aroused by somebody's suffering, pain, fear, humiliation, or terror, and that's how they get off. And to suggest that this is just for money, why go to all that trouble unless that's the actual motive?
Yes. I mean, so I have so many questions. I mean, why drive from Pennsylvania all the way to Nevada to do this and then turn back around again? And then also, why the torture of somebody who is so, I don't know, just so sympathetic. I mean, she was, yeah. I think, all of 4 feet, 75 pounds. She struggled in so many aspects of her life with her disabilities. How does that play into this crime?
Well, the term boyfriend here, I guess, has to be used somewhat loosely, in that sadists are typically pretty calculated in terms of how they acquire victims. They often have other correlated, again, paraphilias. One of which, so you mentioned this, so there's not a known fixation on deserts, but clearly this location proved key because she could have been discreetly murdered back in Pennsylvania if money was the motive. But obviously this location played into the fantasy, played into the planning of the crime. And there's actually a paraphilia called nemophilia, stemming from all the murders in the Pacific Northwest, whereby it was established that a number of serial offenders, part of the crime planning involved a fantasy built around forests. So nemophilia is arousal from forests. So this may be a very important case in terms of establishing the fact that place-specific sort of crime fantasies aren't just forests or water, but deserts. I mean, this is very strange and may actually prove to be very forensically important.
All of it is so distressing. Michael Arntfield, thank you. I hope you'll come back on the program again. I could tap into that expertise a lot with the material we cover. Thank you.
Anytime, thanks.
Coming up, more than a year after a prominent surgeon was found dead in the attic of his Detroit mansion, police finally have a suspect in custody. But they had him. They had him in custody before, too, a year ago. So what gives? And what on earth took them to England and France before they brought the hammer down? That story's next. Now the update we've all been waiting for in a murder mystery from an old money neighborhood in Detroit. It's been more than 15 months since a highly respected neurosurgeon named Devon Hoover was shot in the head twice and then dragged face down into the attic of his own historic mansion. Police found him there the next day. He was wrapped in a carpet, bloody carpet, and he was wearing nothing but a single sock. Early on, they said that it was not a random murder. They said that the doctor almost certainly knew who his killer was. And they said a person of interest was arrested just 6 days later. But then that person was ruled out, or so the investigators said. And months went by with no known leads, no breakthroughs, until yesterday. That's when an arrest was announced and a suspect was named and charged. And it's this person. His name is Desmond Burks. Turns out Desmond Burks is the same person of interest from April of last year. Remarkably, the Wayne County prosecutor said the investigation spanned 5 states and 3 countries, including England and France. But as it turns out, they had eyes on Burks from the very beginning.
The investigation revealed that almost immediately following his murder, multiple fraudulent financial transactions were made from Dr. Hoover's various bank accounts. These transactions spun for several days after that discovery. An analysis of the victims of Dr. Hoover's cell phone records revealed that Dr. Hoover had approximately 4,000 communications with a number attributed to a Desmond Burks, who resided at 9924 Sussex Street in the city of Detroit.
4,000, that's a lot. Police say the suspect and victim had an intimate relationship with Burks, sometimes charging the murdered neurosurgeon for sex work. 2 of the doctor's Cartier watches were found at addresses associated with the guy they arrested, Burks. And on the day of the murder, the doctor's cell phone allegedly traveled from his house, the mansion, to the suspect's home and back again. Tonight, that suspect, Burks, is charged with first-degree murder, felony murder, grand larceny, and gun charges. And in a weird but unrelated twist, he also faces a second-degree murder charge from a road rage death. Again, unrelated, back in May. I am joined now by Carol Gove. She is one of Dr. Hoover's best friends. Carol, I am sorry we're meeting under these circumstances again. I know this has really been hard for you, losing your friend this way. And then finally, after over a year, hearing the suspect is the original person of interest. What's your reaction to that?
Well, that was... I don't know. I mean, it had to be him from the very beginning. I know that the Detroit Police Department and Kim Worthy's office have worked very hard, obviously. And I'm sure all of this work is going to lead to a conviction. I mean, I'm confident this is the right person. He was the suspect from the very beginning. But they've taken their time and they built the case. And I'm sure that he's the right person and they're going to get a conviction. So if that's...
So, Carol, can I ask you, when you heard that name, Desmond Burks, was it a familiar name? When you saw his picture, did you think, I've seen him before? Was he familiar at all to you?
No, I never heard his name. Never. I never heard of him. I never saw him. I do know that he got out of prison I Googled it. Anybody can do that. In July 2022. And he murdered Javon 9 months later. So it wasn't any long-standing friendship, or any relationship.
And of course, it's an allegation until it's proven in court. I do want to ask you about those 4,000 communications. That just sort of stood out like a beacon. Do you have any thoughts about what that might have been?
Well, at first I thought that meant that it was some long-term, which really surprised me, that I wouldn't have heard something about this, or heard the name ever before. But then my daughter told me that she and her best friends text, 25 times a day. So over 9 months, I guess it's not, I don't do it, but I guess everybody else does. So I don't think it's really all that unusual. And, as far as texts in England and France, well, if you buy luxury goods, you got to call them up. I mean, you can get your phone over there in a minute just doing, Googling items. So with all the high-end, purchases, it's not surprising.
Sure. Well, we are going to follow the case. Obviously, there's a trial, and that sure sounds like a mountain of evidence, but we'll see where it leads the jury. Carol Gove, again, I'm so sorry for the loss of your friend. He seemed so beloved in his community and in his neighborhood, and often lent his house out to these charitable events. So, real loss to the community. Thank you for being on. I do appreciate it. Will you stay in touch with us as we continue to follow the case?
If I can add anything, yes. Thank you.
Real quick, yeah. Oh, thank you. All right. Thank you, Carol. Appreciate it. I know we've got a little bit of a delay going back and forth, but we'll check in with Carol again as the trial draws near. Coming up next, the devil went down to Mexico, but he wasn't looking for a soul to steal. He'd already done that. A guy they called El Diablo managed to stay one step ahead of the cops for decades. Tonight, though, he's locked up on murder charges. And joining me next, the bulldog investigator whose cross-border detective work paid off big. Just wait until you hear what the devil was doing for work when his luck finally ran out. That's next.
Session, and we got you. Now with Verizon, get NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube TV on us. And a great deal on Galaxy Z Fold 6 for a total value of $1,250. Only on Verizon.
See you Sunday.
You know, sometimes karma is instant. Somebody cuts you off in traffic and then you see them pulled over for speeding and you're like, yes. But sometimes karma plays the long game, like 20 years long, because that's how long it took police in Ohio and the U.S. Marshals to find Antonio Riaño, who allegedly shot a man to death outside a bar in Cincinnati. He had a nickname on the street. It was El Diablo. It's the devil. Investigators believe that he fled to Mexico, and then the case went ice cold. But then an Ohio cop named Paul Newton dug into the mission, and tonight the devil is locked up. He was arrested a week ago in Mexico, where he was working as a, wait for it, a police officer. Apparently, karma also has a sense of humor. I am pleased to welcome Paul Newton, Chief Investigator of the Butler County, Ohio Prosecutor's Office. Paul, honest to God, he was working as a cop the whole time, like the 20 years that he's been on the run, he's been a cop in Mexico?
At least he has been for the past several months that I know of.
It's unbelievable. Okay, so how'd you find him?
We've been working on this case probably for the past 7 years, trying to locate him, and I'll actually get a warrant for his arrest in Mexico when we were using Department of Justice and U.S. Marshals to do that. And just doing some subtle background work and trying to do some work until we found out we got the warrant for his arrest.
So, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, he can't be Mensa because he had a social media account, and you typed in a name and whammo, he came up?
At first, when you pull up his name, it was a shadowed figured face. I start scrolling down, and so I scroll down. That's the visuals, the video I seen. I was like, "That's him! Oh my God, it's him!"
So he thought he was being crafty by having his profile picture all shaded, but then in his actual feed there were plenty of pictures of him, and you recognized him. I
recognized that face for the past 20 years. I mean, I was on the case back in 2005 when he went on the run.
I mean, what a dope. I can't believe it. But I guess, the other big question here is, honestly, 20 years is like almost your whole career. What kept you on this? Like, why didn't it go cold for you?
I remember the case when I was working at the Butler County Sheriff's Office. I was working the Fugitive unit back then. We were looking for him. Was trying to assist the U.S. Marshals in getting information here in Hamilton to try and get him picked up in Mexico. But, they missed him at one point in time, and he went underground, and he packed back up at like October of last year. That's what his Facebook showed on it.
You're a hero. I know you're going to say no, because that's what guys like you do. You eschew the limelight, but you're a hero cop, and that guy's a dirty cop, allegedly. Was it a slap in the face to discover that he was in your same profession when you found him?
Not really. I don't see it that way. If he's got a warrant for his arrest, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter who you are, what you do for a living. If you have the warrant, you're going to go down. Even if it takes 20 years.
Hey, what was it like in the Cincinnati airport when you met him face to face for the first time in the extradition?
We put him in the back of the car, and I said, Mr. Riaño? He said, yes. I said, welcome back. He kind of smiled and shook his head, and that was it. That was the end of the conversation.
Holy Dinah. Well, thank you for being dogged in your profession and keeping the rest of us safe. It's good to know that you're on that wall, Paul Newton. Thank you for being on tonight.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, so coming up next, what is the difference between a murder trial and painting your bathroom? One is a DIY thing, do it yourself, and the other isn't. And we should not have to explain which is which unless we're talking to Sarah Boone, who is currently defending herself in a murder case. After firing 8 of her very qualified attorneys, she's now finding out the error of her ways and begging the judge not to cut her off from public defenders. Here is how it went when she asked the judge for lawyer number 9.
And again, you, in my opinion, unlawfully denied me or didn't even suggest an evidentiary hearing for me to avoid or try to go about a solution or remedy, so you would understand. So I don't know if it's me either wasting your time or anybody else's time, if it's even an opportunity, or if it's just something that is denied, period.
It is denied, period.
That's short and sweet, but I've got more from Sarah's week in court representing herself, and I'll remind you with a sickening video why she's even there in the first place. Stay with us. Sarah Boone probably wishes that she'd been nicer to her previous attorneys, all 8 of them. Sarah Boone is that Florida woman charged with killing her boyfriend by zipping him into a suitcase and then laughing at him and taunting him while he slowly suffocated and died.
Sarah. You. Sarah. Sarah.
Stupid.
Sarah.
It's my name. Don't wear it up.
Boone is now representing herself in court since a judge decided that she forfeited her right to counsel by firing all of her previous public defenders, one after the other. I remind you the charge is second-degree murder, serious, 0 room for mistakes. This week, acting as her own attorney, Sarah Boone complained about her inability to prepare for her case, but the judge wasn't having any of it.
I'm unable to utilize my time to the full extent. Also, I have a motion here to receive my hard copy evidence because when the laptops are in quote, the laptop is in quotes, closed for the day at 4 p.m., I can therefore pick up using the hard copy evidence.
I haven't had the opportunity to review the motions that you're speaking of, neither has the state. We'll address them today. I don't have a problem doing that. I'm just not going to do it right this second because I haven't had the opportunity to review them yet.
Boone also asked for yet another real lawyer, her 9th. But the judge said, and I'm not using legalese here, fat chance. Trial is set for early October. And that is that, Ms. Boone. And that's it for us. Thank you so much for being here on this Thursday night. Stay tuned. Cuomo coming up next.
We got an active shooter up here on the top of AGR.
All right, 500 lights now, right now.
If you're not law enforcement, go! If you're not law enforcement, go!
I think they got him.
I do too, but we haven't confirmed it.
Hey everybody, I'm Jesse Weber filling in for Chris tonight. Good to be with all of you. So that was very dramatic body cam footage just released by Pennsylvania police of the desperate final moments to stop the shooter before